Hollywood's most compassionate filmmakers have their limits. Ron Howard has long been hailed by the industry as the epitome of quiet authority, charity, and patience. His reputation for composed professionalism appears to be nearly unaffected by the tumult that characterizes the entertainment industry. However, there is a more nuanced reality hidden behind the familiar, comforting smile and the quiet demeanor. Even the most compassionate person can have periods in a career as long and significant as Howard's, when self-preservation takes precedence over tolerance. These internal struggles that developed the director's worldview and reinforced his conviction that respect, discipline, and consistency are not optional characteristics, but rather the cornerstones of any creative endeavor are revealed in these moments, which are frequently hidden from public view. Ron Howard's career in Hollywood started long before he ever worked in front of the camera. He discovered early on, as a red-haired kid on The Andy Griffith Show, that the warmth portrayed on TV did not often correspond with the dynamic that underpinned it. In the decades that followed, Howard developed a style that prioritized harmony over chaos and professionalism over ego, as he went from being a well-liked actor to one of the most reliable directors of his generation. His sets were renowned for providing a sense of security, direction, and inclusion for performers. However, even the most harmonious setting might be threatened by the intensity, volatility, or unbridled influence of the industry's many characters. Howard was not merely put to the test by the 7 actors whose tales shaped this story. He was compelled to reevaluate his values, hone his leadership skills, and face the unsettling reality that unbridled kindness has the power to ruin a whole production. These were not small misunderstandings or short-lived creative disputes that were settled by morning. These confrontations were significant and lasted long after the last take, affecting Howard's casting decisions for years. They involved temperament, authority, and artistic vision. Today, we delve into the untold story of those interactions. From disenchantment as a child to erratic co-stars and legendary figures who manipulated entire productions, these stories highlight the seldom talked about difficulties of managing talent in a field that frequently favors the most vocal individual. We see how the guy regarded as Hollywood's kindest director came to understand the stark limits that would ultimately define his reputation through these unspoken fights. Early in his career, Ron Howard discovered a reality that would follow him throughout the industry. Young actors must learn to carefully negotiate storms that often appear to be the calmest settings on television. Since most youngsters are still learning how to make sense of the world around them, Howard's first storm came during childhood rather than maturity. The public's perception of him as a good-natured child from a small town who lives in a beautiful television family was shaped by his experience on The Andy Griffith Show. However, underneath that facade lay a more complex classroom, where he learned about temperament, authority, and emotional instability long before he had the words to describe them. At first, Andy Griffith, who was regarded as Mayberry's moral compass, greeted Howard with kindness and support. Howard's recollections from later decades state that Griffith treated him as a partner rather than a prop, giving the young actor a sense of worth in a difficult adult setting. For a while, Howard's philosophy that every creative partnership should be built on respect was influenced by this mentorship. But as the performance went on, and Griffith faced more demands, the relationship changed. Griffith's growing anger and the pressure of running a hugely popular television show, according to biographers, caused tense times that those closest to the production could not ignore. Griffith reportedly grew less patient, more controlling, and much more reactive to difficulties or perceived disturbances, according to cast members. As he grew older and more assured of his creative curiosity, Howard occasionally encountered responses from the man portraying his father figure that he had never witnessed before when he asked questions about character or plot direction. This disconnection shattered Mayberry's delusion and made him face the fact that kindness could be eclipsed by authority when it conflicts. His choice of leadership style after he started directing was influenced by the experience, which left a subtle but lasting impression. Years later, Howard faced an entirely different kind of difficulty in 1996 while working on the high-stakes thriller Ransom. Tom Sizemore was a performer whose presence on screen carried a natural weight, and he was an actor of exceptional passion. The instability that had already influenced a large portion of his public image, however, became a daily challenge off-screen. Arrivals from Sizemore were erratic. his intensity may fluctuate quickly between scenes, causing an unsteady vibe to permeate the set. Crew members remembered retakes stacking up because of his unpredictable rhythm, not because lines were forgotten, but because entire scenes' emotional cadence fell apart. Howard had to reorganize entire days around a single performance, even though his shows were renowned for their serene organization. There were times, he subsequently acknowledged in a rare admission, when he had to rearrange the entire production to fit the energy of one person. This stood in stark contrast to his preferred strategy, which was based on common discipline, clarity, and preparation. He took away from Ransom the understanding that one unstable force can destroy the trust necessary for creative endeavors, rather than anger. Howard's silence following Sizemore's death years later was a confirmation that some partnerships result in unresolved distance rather than a judgment. Far earlier in his directorial career, when Howard was still learning how to exercise power while preserving the collaborative spirit he cherished, the next crucial challenge presented itself. Howard's first big studio directorial role came in 1982 with the movie Night Shift. He came to the project full of energy, determination, and a desire to create a space where professionalism and spontaneity could coexist. Michael Keaton flourished in such framework, utilizing improvisation to infuse the movie with vitality and unpredictable elements. Shelley Long came at the piece from the other side. Her dedication to accuracy was unshakable, and she prepared everything with great care. Before letting the cameras roll, she demanded to analyze almost every scene, questioned blocking, and opposed impromptu moments. Despite the fact that both artistic approaches were legitimate, Howard was torn between them. Long's conversations became into drawn-out arguments, which occasionally caused hours, long delays in production, according to crew workers. Howard made no attempt to establish authority or raise his voice. Rather, he made an effort to balance the conflicting demands, modifying his strategies in real time to maintain the harmony he felt was crucial. He acknowledged that some artists come with such predetermined meanings that discovery is all but impossible, and years later characterized such experiences as instructional. Night Shift showed him that too much creative control might stifle the spontaneity needed for filmmaking. These early experiences served as the basis for Howard's conception of conflict. They taught him that emotional stability, temperament, and preparation are just as important to filmmaking as skill. The complex interplay between personality and process, rather than ego alone, is the source of all difficulties, they also said. These early teachings weren't failures for Howard, but a leadership philosophy characterized by empathy, boundaries, and a steadfast respect for the craft was born. The challenges on Ron Howard's career increased both technically and emotionally as he worked on bigger, more ambitious films. By the time he was in his early 20s, Howard was regarded as one of the most reliable directors in the business and was renowned for using a methodical, steady approach to direct big-budget studio productions. The scope of these productions, however, also meant that he would come across artists whose passion and individuality shaped settings that were unlike anything he had ever overseen. He was forced to face the conflict between his artistic enthusiasm and professional boundaries as a result of these events, which demonstrated how even a skilled filmmaker may have to negotiate uncharted territory. The work on A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe turned out to be one of the most obvious examples of this fact. Already a well-known actor for his unadulterated dedication, Crowe approached each job as a psychological investigation. His method required complete immersion, frequently obfuscating the distinction between personal identity and performance. He brought a laser-like intensity that changed the tone of the entire production when he arrived on Howard's set. He came to work every day ready for a sort of internal conflict, not against his coworkers, but against the entire process of making movies, according to those who worked with him. He questioned rewrites, analyzed camera angles, and interpreted every word Howard said as a challenge to go farther into each scenes. Emotional heart. The relationship between Howard and Crowe, according to later insiders, was characterized by ongoing negotiation rather than animosity. In order to foster an environment where trust could grow, Howard felt that performers should be carefully guided. Whether or not that intensity caused conflict, Crowe thought it was important to approach the material with unadulterated intensity. As a result, the creation was characterized by both extreme strain and amazing craftsmanship. The assistant directors recalled that Howard remained steadfast, anchoring the set with cool resolve rather than raising his voice. Although Crowe's intensity made the procedure much more challenging than the director had anticipated, his genius lifted the movie. Without specifically mentioning Crowe, Howard's later reflection that working with some performers meant holding on rather than directing encapsulated the spirit of their partnership. Despite A Beautiful Mind's popularity and subsequent place in cinematic history, Howard came away from the behind-the-scenes experience with a silent realization that some creative collaborations, no matter how great, are not intended to be repeated. The difficulties in collaborating with Russell Crowe stemmed from conflicting approaches, artistry, and passion. The difficulties Howard encountered with Marlon Brando stemmed from a completely other source, one that was influenced by age, heritage, and a disdain for traditional filmmaking conventions. Getting the chance to direct a project with Brando in the middle of the 1990s sounded like a career high point for Howard. A performer whose influence on acting methods and on-screen persona had revolutionized a whole generation of filmmaking, Brando was a titan of the film industry. But Brando's relationship with the craft had changed significantly by this point in his life. He began to view movies as platforms for establishing his creative authority rather than as collaborative endeavors, disregarding timetables, financial constraints, or the labor of others. According to witnesses, Brando would arrive on set without knowing his lines, demanding that language be printed on cue cards that were in his line of sight, and pause scenes to demand wholly different interpretations or fresh motivations. The stage was transformed into an arena controlled by one man's whims when it ought to have operated as a synchronized ecology. Howard made an effort to keep everything in order, changing course professionally and patiently, but Brando's unpredictable nature weakened even the best laid plans. His hours-long absences, on some days, caused production to be delayed and left the cast and crew in a condition of worry. What should have been a straightforward conversation turned out to be the crucial moment. Brando frequently interrupted, gave the order for instant rewrites, left the set for a long time, and came back with an entirely different idea for his character. Howard was forced to face an uncomfortable reality when he was told that filming would have to start over. Even the most admired legends can cause a project to collapse if discipline and respect are lost. These interruptions ultimately caused the output to collapse. Instead of publicly denouncing Brando, Howard opted to uphold the diplomacy that had come to define his career. However, people in the field realized that the encounter had made a deep impression. The event demonstrated how vulnerable a director, even one with Howard's level of experience, can be while working in an inconsistent creative environment. It also strengthened his conviction that greatness cannot make up for a lack of respect for one another. In the past, Brando's impact had molded the performing industry, but in this case, the lack of organization masked the genius that characterized his formative years. Together, Howard's encounters with Crowe and Brando exposed him to two extremes: unbridled autonomy and tremendous emotion. These experiences gave the skills he had started learning decades before additional depth. They taught him that when artistic brilliance is separated from discipline, it might jeopardize a production's integrity. More significantly, they served as a reminder that a director's duties go beyond directing performances. Protecting the setting in which such performances take place is another aspect of it. Ron Howard's leadership style was shaped by the lessons he learned from previous disputes as he advanced in his directorial career. However, he was compelled to face the emotional center of his professional identity after two specific meetings. These events did not take place on tumultuous sets or in deteriorating productions. Rather, these arose from changing relationships with people he held in high regard, demonstrating that conflict can result not merely from ego or instability, but also from the fluctuating weight of celebrity itself. The romance between Howard and Henry Winkler started amid the bright nostalgia of Happy Days, a program designed to capture coziness, humor, and a feeling of home comfort. At the start of the series in 1974, Howard played the role of the main character, the well-known American lad next door. He was readily identifiable due to his years as Opie, and his presence gave the show a feeling of stability and consistency. Winkler was originally supposed to be a supporting character, a rebellious counterpoint to Howard's polished image as Arthur Fonzarelli. However, the rebel in a leather jacket elicited an unexpectedly strong response from the cultural milieu of the era. The Fonz swiftly went from being a supporting character to a phenomenon, and the show's axis changed along with him. Producers and writers noticed the momentum and started reworking the episode structures to highlight Winkler's captivating personality. Fans rallied behind his streetwise charm and distinctive gestures, and he was given additional prominence in promotional materials. Howard was subtly eclipsed on a program that was initially based on his character, despite his vision of Happy Days as a springboard to a future as a director. Reflections from the crew and the actors indicate that personal hostility was not the cause of the conflict. Howard appreciated Winkler and saw his potential. Each demeanor. However, internal conflict resulted from the unavoidable redistribution of attention. This kind of conflict cannot be expressed without upsetting the delicate balance of group activity. Years later, Howard said that the encounter made him rethink his role in front of the lens. He sensed that the story was changing all around him, leaving him as a character whose existence was crucial but not pivotal. He had known since he was a little boy that the entertainment industry might change course suddenly, and that people at the center of a tale could suddenly find themselves on the brink of it. Instead of opposing the change, Howard interpreted it as a sign. The dynamic on Happy Days encouraged him to pursue directing with new vigor, as his goals had always leaned toward telling stories. This subtle but intensely personal turning moment in his career turned out to be one of the most significant. If the encounter with Henry Winkler demonstrated how celebrity can alter artistic hierarchies, then Howard's work with Mel Gibson on Ransom demonstrated how star power can subvert authority in the actual filmmaking process. Gibson had just won Academy Awards for both acting and directing, and by 1996, his career was at its peak. His presence had a huge impact on any project, and there was no denying his faith in his creative instincts. It seemed to be a perfect fit when Howard agreed to direct Ransom. Both guys had a reputation for brilliance and were dedicated professionals with powerful, creative imaginations. But the dynamics became more complicated once the cameras started rolling. Gibson took a very active role in the filmmaking process. He offered feedback on parts of production that usually fell outside the purview of an actor, questioned script choices, and discussed camera positioning. He was consulted on everything from line delivery to logistical choices, frequently with the authority of someone used to ship steering, according to crew members. Though renowned for encouraging candid communication, Howard had to deal with an endless barrage of recommendations, objections, and changes. Recognizing Gibson's extraordinary talent while preserving the framework that kept the production together required his leadership to strike a careful balance between toughness and attentiveness. Although there was no public confrontation, the tension was clear. Although Howard maintained his composure, he expended significant effort to maintain the balance of his set. Colleagues characterized him as doing two jobs behind the scenes, directing the movie and mitigating Gibson's impact. The encounter confirmed an insight that had been developing throughout his career. A director needs to protect the setting in which performances take place, in addition to directing the performances themselves. Even the most talented contributors may inadvertently throw off a production's rhythm in the absence of defined boundaries. Howard had learned a lot by the time Ransom was done. The difficulty with Gibson resulted from the inevitable clash of two powerful creative impulses, rather than from malice or carelessness. However, the emotional toll served as a reminder that leadership involves both decisiveness and empathy. Despite their success on screen, certain collaborations require more effort than a productive workplace can provide. Howard's lengthy journey through the difficulties of collaboration reached its emotional peak in these interactions with Winkler and Gibson. All of these encounters helped to shape the mentality that would characterize his later years: safeguard the process, safeguard the people, and safeguard the craft. The trust necessary for narrative would be jeopardized by anything less. Ron Howard carved up a career characterized by purposeful clarity rather than confrontation over the course of his extraordinary career. He was not weakened by the battles he faced, nor did they diminish the goodwill that audiences have long associated with his name. Rather, they cultivated a methodical comprehension of the actual nature of leading a creative atmosphere. Every encounter demonstrated that a harmonic set is not produced by accident. from the fluctuating dynamics of Happy Days to the emotional upheavals of Ransom. It is created by making thoughtful decisions, communicating politely, and being prepared to set limits. But even when those limits conflict with the enormous impact of celebrities, Howard discovered that the breakdown of trust poses a bigger risk to a production than artistic aspirations. Without mutual respect, preparation, and stability, even the most skilled groups fall apart. A reality he had known since infancy was confirmed by his encounters with erratic performers, strong characters, and legends who viewed the process as incidental. Being a professional is not a goal in itself. It is the fulcrum that permits the growth of creativity. The crew's safety and the story's veracity are at stake when that anchor falters. Howard continued to establish a reputation for precise and empathetic directing in the years that followed these interactions. His dedication to establishing secure, cooperative environments came to define his leadership style. He was a man who gave stability to projects of enormous magnitude and complexity, and colleagues frequently referred to him as the calm center of any storm. However, the mindset underlying that constancy was acquired via experience. He learned the value of sticking to one's principles and the price of compromise from the quiet disputes that took place behind closed doors. His generosity was not diminished by these teachings. They made it more resilient, intentional, and structured. Howard's tale encourages a more comprehensive analysis of the entertainment sector as a whole. Talent can be amplified by fame, but power dynamics in relationships can also be distorted. A film can be elevated by creative genius, but if it isn't counterbalanced by discipline, it can also become unstable. The stereotype of the kind director who willingly accepts every disruption is just that, a myth. In actuality, leaders who are prepared to defend the process with the same ferocity as they do the art are necessary for sustained filmmaking. The question that emerges when we reflect on the 7 performers that push the boundaries of Hollywood's most patient director is both straightforward and illuminating. Did Howard have unreasonable expectations, or were these performers going beyond the standards of professionalism that are necessary in any collaborative setting? The response influences our perceptions of the duties of those who lead the creative world, as well as how we interpret these unique tales. How do you feel? Comment below with your opinions, and come along for more untold stories, unseen relationships, and the nuanced realities of the most renowned personalities in entertainment.